right, so I'm gonna call the meeting to order at 6, look at that, in a minute, that's at 6:37. My watch says 6:37, so we all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I ask that the team members remain standing. Before we start the official business, I want to pause and remember Catherine Grimar. Former BET members Larry Simon and Val Storm have prepared the following statement. Catherine Grimar was first elected to the BET in November 1995 and served 10 years with distinction until her resignation on February 12, 2006, when she relocated from the town of Greenwich. During her tenure, Catherine worked to improve the town's IT infrastructure, focused on HR policies, and helped to make some difficult budget decisions. She was a kind, smart, hardworking, conscientious, gentle, generous person, a good friend who made an exceptional contribution to the board during her tenure and deserves recognition for her service. Her untimely death on February 23, 2019 is a loss felt by all of us. And I ask that we observe a moment of silence and remembrance. Okay, thank you. When I received this request, it was a reminder of our humanity, and I just wanted to take the opportunity to say that it's a privilege to know and work with each of you. During our discussions, we don't take the opportunity to say that, so thank you for your service and for your friendship to all of us. Now we'll move to the official business. We've had a request to move one item of new business up forward from to proceed the executive session. So I'd like to have a motion to change the agenda to allow us to take up the appointment of the town treasurer at now.
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Weiss. you, Mr. Weisbrod. Is there a second? Mr. Drake.
I'd like to confirm all the favorable things that Mr. Weisbrod has said and second his motion.
Thank you, Mr. Drake. That motion has been moved and seconded. I'd like to open it up for discussion. Any comment from the team members? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote. All in favor of the appointment of Ms. Yametz as town treasurer, please say aye and raise your hand.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The appointment is unanimously carried. Congratulations, Natasha, and thank you for your service. Yes?
I've been very fortunate to work with a wonderful team, called Finance Department, and thank you, Peter, for heading it. And also, I have to acknowledge that I had a great mentor, which everybody here knows and I'm sure remembers. So thank you very much, the board, for your trust, and I'll do my best to keep it. Thank you.
I just want to, for the speakers tonight, you cannot use this. You're going to have to use the portable mic. There was 47 applicants. We went down to 5. Mr. Drake and Mr. Weisbrod and myself interviewed. There was two sets of interviews, but Natasha was head and shoulders above everyone else. But I wanted to point something out. If you look, I'm going to do part of my controller's report. The CD program is up and running. The Treasury program is up and running. And if you look in there, there's also 2 new initiatives that we've started with the checks versus the ACH and the earnings credit initiatives. But Natasha has done this with a brand new staff. We've got 2 brand new account clerks, and with Natasha leaving the assistant position, there's a vacated slot there, and we now have to do a search for an assistant treasurer. If Natasha works 25 more years, this is probably the most challenging time she'll ever have in that 25 years. And I really look forward to having her stay here 25 years. So congratulations. Thank you, Natasha. Thank you for letting me speak.
Yes, I'd like to make a motion to go into executive session.
We have a motion by Ms. Crumick, seconded by Ms. Vasiliotis, and that is to go into executive session to discuss pending litigation. And I don't know how to turn off the mics. So, and I had a long list of questions. No, let's just do the. Okay, Kathy. There was a motion by Ms. Moriarty, seconded by Mr. Raymer, to approve 1200 to come out of executive session at 7:22. Thank you all for your patience. Moving on to our request for budget adjustments, which is. No, we need to take votes first. Yep, I'm getting there. There are 7 requests for budget adjustments this evening. On the agenda, I identified 2 as non-routine. We will move a third to non-routine after we take up these 2. The first item listed on the agenda is SE. I meant to ask this question. It's listed as SE2. It may be SE3 for the law department settlement for Naranjo versus the town of Greenwich. Can I have a motion?
I'd like to move that we take up SE2 from the law department to approve a settlement amount for Naranjo versus town of Greenwich in the amount of $45,000.
Is there a second?
I second it.
Motion by Ms. Crumick, seconded by Ms. Vasiliotis for a settlement. Naranjo would be town of Greenwich in the amount of $45,000. Any discussion? Okay. Ms. Crumick, please give the law committee report.
The law committee took up this case. We discussed it and we agreed 2-0-0 to settle the case for $45,000.
Any further discussion? All in favor of this motion, please say aye and raise your hand.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? That item has carried 12-0-0. Can I have a motion for the next item?
I'd like to make a motion, SE3 from the Law Department, to settle the case Masaccio versus Ferretti in the amount of $20,000.
Is there a second?
That was a valiant effort on the names, and I second.
Okay, we have a
Thank
motion
you.
by Ms. Crumick, seconded by Ms. Vasiliotis. Ms. Crumick, can you please give the Law Committee report?
Yes, the Law Committee took up this discussion on this case, and we voted 2-0-0 to settle the case for $20,000.
Okay, any further discussion on this item? Okay, hearing none. All in favor of the motion to settle this case for $20,000, please say aye and raise your hand.
Aye.
Okay, that's 11. I'm going to abstain on this one, so that item has carried 11-0-1. Yes, and now can I have a motion to move the,
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion to move
Thank
FD2 fire, which is a routine application, into the non-routine application section. That is a request from the fire department to release the conditions for the Round Hill Station renovation in the amount of $100,000.
okay, so we have a motion by Ms. Crumick, seconded by Mr. Raymer, to move Round Hill Fire from routine to non-routine. All in favor, please say aye and raise your hand.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? That motion has carried 12-0-0. Okay, now can I have a motion to put that on the floor?
Yes, Madam Chairman, I'd like to make a motion for FD2 from the fire department to appropriate $100,000 to release the conditions on the Round Hill Station renovation.
Okay, do we have a motion? Is there a second? Motion by Ms. Crumick, seconded by Ms. Tarkington. Ms. Moriarty, can you give the Budget Committee report?
Yes, this was the second time the fire department and the volunteer Round Hill Fire Company was with the Budget Committee. They came in December 2018 for the first conversation. That conversation really was about the status of their meeting the conditions and asking for more information about what it is the Budget Committee needed to move forward on this. They came back to our meeting last week. There were 3 parts to the condition. This is the second $100,000 of planning funds. They are expected, they need those funds. They would like to move to begin construction later on this year, and so that's why they need the access to these funds. There are 3 parts to the condition. The first one to ask for whether there was a clear title to the property. At the Budget Committee, we received a letter from the Assistant Town Attorney that gave his opinion that the right of reversion is null and void, and he provided a title insurance policy ensuring any enforcement of that. The second condition was an opinion from town staff about whether the septic fields would be able to handle the anticipated work. So at the meeting, we got a comment from the town administrator that he had spoken with the Department of Health, environmental staff that looks at the septic plans. They reviewed the site plan, looked at the construction plans, and in their opinion, based on the information they had, would believe the current system would appear to support the project. However, it was clearly noted that that is not a binding approval, and they will still need to go through the regular P&Z processes to get that approval. The third part of the condition was to have a contract between the Round Hill Volunteer Fire Company and the town in advance of the work continuing. And while at our Budget Committee an executed agreement was not presented, one of the key terms identified in our prior discussion being the clawback of the town's contribution if the volunteer station were to cease operations was presented and discussed. The town administrator further stated that he's not able to complete a letter agreement at this point since it's related to the stream of funding that's anticipated. Currently in our budget, we were looking at a funding request for $2,000 per year for 5 years, which was similar to the arrangement that the town had with Banksville's renovation. That would total $1 million. What the town administrator came to us last week saying is he would like to propose an $800,000 budget item in the current year's budget. That would more closely align to the expected appropriation and spending pattern of the project, and the town would reimburse invoices that it is presented with at 50% up to the $8,000 total. The way the clawback was designed is you need to have the full amount of the capital contribution presented before you can take it back. So his proposal was to move forward at this point to release the conditions, knowing that they are in discussions about the management agreement, and he would expect that maybe a condition on the fiscal 20 project for construction funds would at that time ask for an executed contract with the town. The vote at the at the budget committee was to release the funds 4-0.
Thank you, Ms. Moriarty. Mr. Reamer.
Yeah, the three conditions were originally mine that I raised and have raised again at each of these various points, so it seems appropriate that I comment. I was satisfied that the affirmative title insurance, which was written by Connecticut Attorneys Title Insurance Company, would insure the property owner, not the town, but insure the property owner against a loss that resulted from an exercise of the not one but two rights of reversion which exist against the property. So I was perfectly willing to waive my objection as to that condition. The septic was a little more challenging because we had earlier heard from our facilities manager that there was concerns about the septic system. But I think it lies well within the province of the first selectman, who's also the commissioner of the fire department, to make a business judgment. The business judgment that seems to be made was based not on nothing but on material advice that he was getting from the Department of Environmental Services. I wouldn't say I'm fully satisfied about the issues of the septic, but I was willing to let it go on that basis. The last condition, the contractual arrangements, was a little more problematic. I was reluctantly willing to lift the condition on this $100,000, but I indicated pretty clearly that I would be requesting from my colleagues on the BET that the condition be continued as to the $800,000, which it appears as if it will be in the capital budget that we'll be looking at on Thursday evening. And indeed, I've passed around to my colleagues the wording of a condition that I would be asking at that time. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Any further discussion on this item? While we have Mr. Kick in the audience, I'm wondering whether I can ask you whether it's the expectation that the town is going to put forward and I haven't seen it in all of my emails. Have we received a revised capital sheet? Capital, if we have gotten it?
It was in that
In that
packet the other night.
Okay. And is it anticipated, I think I just heard Ms. Moriarty say that the $800,000 would be applied to invoices submitted for work performed based on a 50-50 split? Is that what I just heard?
The 800,
Yes.
that's the plan, yeah.
That's the
for the
plan, and that will
project.
be represented in the contract that's executed.
Sure.
Terrific. Is there anything else you'd like to add on this project?
Unless you have any more questions.
Thank you for being here this evening.
Thank you.
Okay, so hearing no further discussion, we have a motion to release the condition on the $100,000 design funds that was made by Ms. Crumick, seconded by Ms. Tarkington. All in favor, please say aye and raise your hand.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? That item has carried. Thank you. Which 1200. Which brings us to the remaining budget adjustments. There are 4 budget adjustments that were identified as routine applications. Ms. Crumick, can you please move these items?
Certainly. ED 13 from the Board of Education in the amount of $12,820 for the approval to use the Greenwich High School scoreboard replacement. ED 15 from the Board of Education for $22,969 for the approval to use Local Live. ED 14 from the Board of Education in the amount of $200,000 for the release of conditions for A&E funding. And TA3 from TAG in the amount of $73,250 on the basis of the release of conditions for the fourth quarter of fiscal year 19 budget.
Okay, so there's a motion. Can I have a second? Seconded, moved by Ms. Crumick, seconded by Ms. Tarkington. Ms. Moriarty, can you please give the Budget Committee report?
Yes, the Budget Committee discussed all 4 of these items at its meeting last week. The first item, ED 13, the approval to use a donation for a GHS baseball scoreboard, $12,820. This is the donation of a replacement scoreboard for the baseball field. The Budget Committee confirmed that the donation covers all expected costs for the item and that it will be positioned on the existing supports, so no trenching is required. The donation was from the Greenwich High School Diamond Club, and we expressed our appreciation for their support. The vote recommending to approve this donation was 4-0-0. The next item, ED 15, Board of Ed approval to use a donation for the Local Live service, $22,969. Local Live is a service that live streams athletic events. The donation covers the full cost for the first year of the service. The service, we understand, is a contract with 3 one-year terms, or it may have been expressed as 3 terms with 3 one-year contracts, either way, but we are told that it is cancelable at any time. So if the service or the donation were not to continue, or the high school wouldn't see that it can fund the service, it could exit the agreement. The donation was from the Greenwich Athletic Foundation, and certainly our appreciation for their support was noted. The vote for recommending approval was 4-0-0. The next item was ED 14, the Board of Ed release of conditions for advanced A&E funding of $200,000. In our fiscal 19 budget, advanced A&E for the Board of Ed was higher than in prior years. It was forecast at $700,000 was the request. So a condition was added for demonstrated need on this last $200,000. At last week's Budget Committee meeting, the Board of Ed indicated it has $240,000 remaining in the appropriation. They are preparing for about $1.5 million of project work this summer from both current fiscal 20 projects as well as prior years, and they need access to this funding to be ready to perform the work during the summer period. The vote for recommending release was 4-0-0. And then for TAG, TAG's request was release of conditions on the fourth quarter fiscal 19 budget for $73,250. The discussion that we had last week was really a small update from the discussion we had on February 11th when it came to the Budget Committee for its fiscal 20 budget request. They continue to show progress in their operating performance, that they are focusing on cost control and expanding revenues. They did note that they have a fundraiser this Saturday and that tickets are available on their website. The committee voted 4-0-0 to recommend release of the conditions.
Thank you, Ms. Moriarty. Are there any further observations or questions on any of the 4 routine items? Hearing none, I'm going to call for a vote. All in favor of approving the 4 items, please say aye and raise your hand.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Those items have carried 12-0-0. Which brings us to item 4 on our agenda, which is the assessor's report. Ms. Elliott.
Good evening, Madam Chair and fellow members of the BET. I'd like to present the assessor's report for March 2019. First of all, the Board of Assessment Appeals has completed its duties for the 2018 grand list. The assessor's office has mailed out all the decision notices, and those were mailed out on March 15th. So any property owners will have 60 days from the March 15th date to file an appeal to court if they are not satisfied with the Board of Assessment Appeals. Secondly, we have the senior tax relief. We are currently taking applications To date, we only have around 96 people so far. We believe some of the delay is that people are dealing with the new tax returns this year, and we've reviewed them, and they are a bit different, and they are a bit cumbersome, to say the least. So hopefully we'll be getting more of these as the April 15th date approaches. Finally, we sent out the request for the proposal, the RFP for the 2020 revaluation. It was sent out on February 26th. The bids will be due March 26th at 3 o'clock. I do know that I have spoken to a few vendors and met with a couple of them as well, so hopefully we will have a few bids in which to choose from and review. Any other questions for me this evening? Yes.
Ms. Crumick?
Two questions. I just want to go back to the senior tax relief.
Mhm.
How many did you say have already applied?
We only had 92 so far, completed applications.
92. And what's the average in past years?
This year, we usually get around 200 plus each year, so they have until May 15th.
Okay.
Usually we get the majority of them after April 15th if they're required to file a tax return. That's why we don't get them until after that point.
Okay. One other question. In your long-term objectives, you talk about utilizing QDS, the Quality Data Services, additional capabilities to more efficiently serve the town. How would you describe what you're doing or what you're hoping to do in the future? Are there other modules you'd be using, or is it just
It's just a matter of
the use of the system?
It's just a matter of getting all the departments and all the people who use quality data to be able to extract all that information from that. Every point of information in quality data now I can extract and create a report if I wanted to, except for a handful of things that are coming from the Department of Motor Vehicles or something like that. But quality data has such flexibility. We should be able to generate any report, and if it's not a canned report, we should be able to create the report ourselves.
Thank you.
Are there any questions, other questions for Ms. Elliott? Okay. Hearing none, can I have oh. Terrific, I was just looking for that. So we have a motion by Ms. Tarkington. Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Raymer to accept the assessor's report. All in favor, please say aye and raise your hand.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? That item is carried 12-0-0. Mr. Mlynarski, can you please present the controller's report?
Good evening, Madam Chair, BET members. I just have two quick updates. First is on page 4. In the Cybersecurity Task Force, you should have received an email this afternoon. Let me know if you didn't. The task force has actually been formed, and we have representation from the town, police department, the libraries, Board of Education, Risk Management, which is Megan D'Amato, who'll be leading this effort, Lil Department, and Nathaniel Witherall will be covered by Tom Klein out of the IT department. You also got a quote for the assessment is one of the requests of the BET Audit Committee, asking for $150,000. I guess you want the Finance Department to propose an amendment along with the Democratic and Republican amendments?
Absolutely, actually.
No, seriously,
anyone who
do you want
takes a
roll
piece
it?
of work off of our desk, I would anticipate, I don't know that all members have gotten the report from the risk manager yet, only because in the flurry of emails. Yeah, in the flurry of emails, I didn't get to forward it yet, so I will forward it at the end of the evening, and people can expect that there will be an amendment, at least introduced on Thursday, to add funds to the Finance Department budget for the cybersecurity. 150,000 is what was suggested by the risk manager, based on the proposals she received.
Correct, yes.
You said that was there more than one update? You said there was.
Yes. The page 7, just going back to earlier, I mentioned that Natasha has done a great job with the CD program, the Treasury Bill program, along with Kathleen Murphy. But on page 7, the check versus ACH initiative, just want to give God bless you, quick report. Natasha managed to get J.P. Morgan Chase to come in today, and they gave us about an hour of fraud prevention, little mini seminar with the Treasury staff and the accounts payable staff. It was great. It tells you how to prevent fraud in the area of emails, et cetera. And one of the things that came out was very interesting with JPM Chase. They have in their IT department, they pretend to be criminals, terrorists, hackers, and they try to hack into the employees at the bank. And if they're successful, the employee who accidentally gave away their email address or tapped onto a link has a pop-up and says, you just violated company policy, et cetera, and they're required to have remedial training on how to prevent fraud. It's something I was thinking about today. It would be great to do that here to teach people to not be hacking, not hacking, but allowing hackers to get into our email system.
I can think of a whole host of things that we might want to pop up on violations.
Exactly. That's a segue into the second part of the meeting Natasha held with J.P. Morgan Chase in the initiative, the cost-saving initiative that we're having with printed checks versus ACH in the cost savings. Natasha managed to negotiate with J.P. Morgan Chase. If you looked in the Treasury report, you could see that we averaged like 2,180 checks per month. I'm sorry, transactions. That's a combination. 79% is the checks and 71 and 29, I think the numbers are. Checks versus ACH. She managed to negotiate down, if we're successful, to go from 50 cents down to 25 cents per ACH. And also she managed in another area of the bank fees to negotiate a $360 a month savings. So this is a project between Treasury and the chief accountant, between the accounts payable and the Treasury working together, where we could save tens of thousands of dollars over the next year. And again, it's just, you made the right choice by hiring Natasha as the treasurer. Any questions on either the cybersecurity or the Treasury's report or any other?
Only Pete, that I don't think, if that email on cybersecurity came from you.
Violation of policy, violation of policy, violation of policy. Mr. Raymer, would you like to speak?
Was that a pop-up?
That was my pop-up.
I'd be grateful if you'd send that cybersecurity. I don't think I received that.
Yes,
I'm not sure if others did.
You can copy that, Pete.
Yeah. Get a copy of it.
Ms. Hess.
Done.
Thanks, Pete. So just, I always come back to Munis, and I know you've got the RFP out there. I just, in terms of the modules, when I see what you're looking at, I mean, are you contemplating, when you said financial reporting, is it just the finance side, or are you looking at other modules? And I would just like to understand better, kind of, are we going to fully utilize Munis? How are we planning on thinking about it on a go-forward basis? But I think this ties in to a lot of the conversations we're having in terms of the use of technology to gain transparency and efficiencies.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Well, I guess the question is confirming what aspect of Munis that you're contemplating using going forward. It seems like you probably will likely go with Munis based on the fact you only have two
Okay.
responses.
We bid out the financial software. Munis has been the vendor for over 20 years. They do, it's in the controller's report. Basically, they're responsible for general ledger, budgeting, accounts payable, cash receipting, et cetera. Unfortunately, nobody bid. We got one bid from a firm actually one of my staff was familiar with the firm. They worked with this firm in another capacity. I Googled the firm, and they had 40,000 nonprofits. They didn't have a single town client. They had a couple Board of Eds. So we basically I can't say stuck, because Munis is the best product that's out there as far as small to medium-sized municipalities. One of the major areas that is, we're in the middle of proceeding with a major enhancement in the area of Munis. As I've reported in the controller's report, we were unhappy with the areas of the tax assessor, the tax collector, and we switched to quality data services about 3 years ago. We also did an RFP, and we went from Munis on the payroll to from Munis on the payroll to ADP. As far as all the other software, you're probably right. We don't utilize it to 100% of its capacity, but what we do in finance is we feel that we use it as much as we need out of it, and we think we're doing the best we can in that area. Areas that you might be weak is capital project management, which is going to come out to another part of the controller's report, is the Bloom-Shapiro report, and where we're going forward with capital project management, tracking projects, et cetera, et cetera. That's probably one area where we're weak, is in the capital project area outside of the finance department. But as far as the product itself, I think if 10 firms bid, we probably would have ended up with Munis. Not because we're lazy not to change or anything like that, but we think that they're the best out there for our needs.
Pete, just to follow up on that, is this going to be a new contract with Munis or an extension of the old?
Well, obviously it's an extension of the old. We still have to negotiate the prices, and we've got to get the certain terms in the contract ironed out between purchasing and the law department. There's the famous indemnification issue, which has to be corrected or amended.
Has there been any attention paid to the training provisions? There have been a number of reports that have indicated that we could use a little bit, some of the town employees working with Munis could use a little bit more training on the systems. Is that something that would be part of the new contract?
You're referring to the Bloom-Shapiro recommendation?
Both Bloom-Shapiro and also HDG, I believe.
Yeah.
Or maybe it was PKF, actually. It was PKF that talked about that.
Yeah, there's two areas. Is the Board of Education probably needs some training on Munis. The Finance Department is actually the trainers. When we get new employees that come into the system, whether at the department head or somebody that's just simply doing requisitions, our accounts payable staff goes out into the field and trains. We haven't had the opportunity to enlighten or train the Board of Ed. However, Roland is a source for the Board of Education as far as training. Angela Cincarelli, who also works with Roland, is a source for training. So we're there to provide that training as far as a result of the Bloom-Shapiro report. You referenced did you mean the old Connor Davies, Nathaniel Witherall? They probably need some training up there in certain areas. But there's a conflict between two software systems up there. There's the Matrix system and there's the Munis. And we need to dive a little deeper and figure out where the shortcomings are.
So maybe we should have a further conversation as you negotiate that contract about whether there are areas that can be supplemented that will provide support to Roland and Angela in training other departments and maybe even working out some of the software incompatibilities so that it becomes a little bit more seamless. Are there other questions? Mr. Dees. Oh.
On page 6, your report makes reference to reports being finished by the internal auditor on the town clerk. I was wondering, I see it's been received, but it's not yet been submitted to the BET or to the audit committee quite yet. I was wondering if there's anything you'd share with us tonight. Is there any recommendations that are in the report?
You're asking me to comment on a draft report, which I will do anyway. This is basically there's two reports coming down the pike. There's the parking services follow-up. We haven't gotten the responses from the parking services representative, whether it's the Office of the First Selectman or the Police Department or the former consultant Mr. Lally. So I really can't comment on that report. The town service, the town clerk is getting a clean bill of health. I've seen the responses. The new system is in. Everything is working well. But protocol is you don't usually comment on a draft report. Other than I'll just tell you that I've seen the responses. They'll be presented at the audit committee, and it's a clean report.
If there are no further questions for Mr. Mynarski, can I have a motion to accept the controller's report? Moved by Ms. Tarkington, seconded by Mr. Raymer. All in favor, please say aye and raise your hand. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That item has carried 12-0-0. Thank you, Mr. Mynarski. The next item on the agenda is the Treasurer's Report showing investing portfolio activity for the month of February 2019. Are there any questions on the Treasurer's Report? Hearing none, I note that the BET has received the report. We have one report from the Standing Committee this evening from our Human Resources Committee. Mr. Turner, can you please provide us an update?
Yes, Madam Chairman, I would bring your attention to the next page in the packet. At the very top, it has BET Human Resources Committee recommendations to the BET with today's date. Specifically on this page, as you can see with the vote at the very bottom of the page of 400, where the committee makes a recommendation that the BET consider an M&C salary increase of 1.5% with the possibility of an additional 0.5% awarded for high performance at the discretion of the employee's manager. And again, that passed the committee 400.
And is that all for your committee report?
That is the first half of the committee report. The second half of the committee report is to move the approval of salary increases for elected officials, the first selectman, town clerk, and tax collector, specifically for 2% for the calendar year 2020 and 1.5% for the calendar year 2021.
Those items are scheduled later in the agenda under new business, but does anyone have any questions for Mr. Turner on the HR committee report? Okay. That is the only report tonight from our standing committee liaisons and special project teams. We do have, which brings us to item 10 in our agenda, which is old business. We have 3 items of old business this evening. The first is to accept the June 30th, 2018 annual report. This item was raised at the February 2019 meeting. The BET is responsible by charter for the production of the annual report, and the lion's share of the consolidation and production is performed by Elaine Brown in the finance department. So we offer her our thanks for performing this task. Last month, members asked for more time to review the annual report before voting, and the BET has now had that opportunity. I am not aware of any objections that have been raised. So as a result, can I please have a motion to accept the report? And a second. Seconded, so that the annual report has been moved by Ms. Tarkington, seconded by Ms. Moriarty. Is there any discussion? Okay, hearing none, can I please have a vote? All in favor of accepting the June 30th, 2018 annual report, please say aye and raise your hand. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstention? That item has carried 12-0-0. Second item under old business is a vote to accept the fund balance policy. As outlined in the controller's report and as reported last month, the special committee on the debt and fund balance policies recommended that the BET reaffirm the fund balance policy in substance, and this item is now on our agenda for consideration. Ms. Moriarty, can you please present this item?
Yes, the Debt and Fund Balance Policy Special Project Team was comprised of Mr. Weisbrod, Mr. Drake, and Mr. Deuce, and myself. We met lots of times, starting in October and going through February. I'm just looking at 10 meetings. I presented a report at our last meeting during the first read of the policy, but quickly, On the fund balance policy, we are presenting to the BET tonight. It's a completely rewritten policy. However, there are no substantive changes from the prior policy. So you don't have a track changes draft because we didn't use the starting point of last year's policy. But the discussion that we had over our meetings on fund balance was that the level of fund balance in the town has been growing in recent years. In fiscal 15, it was $35 million, and at the end of fiscal 18, it had grown to $55 million. That exceeds the policy target 5 to 10% of our operating budget. The fund balance grew to a variety of factors: conservative budgeting, unexpected revenue, healthcare expense savings, and fewer than expected interim appropriations for unexpected capital needs. We spent time with the town's financial consultant for debt issuance to find the context of trends in other municipalities. He had indicated that other municipalities have been increasing their fund balance ranges. However, these towns are more dependent on state revenues for balancing their budget. These towns also have lower grand lists and higher mill rates, so they have less flexibility to raise additional revenue if they really needed to. He did not believe that Greenwich needed to increase our target range for fund balance in order to maintain our AAA rating. Among the committee members, our discussion centered around what level of fund balance is prudent for the town. Some items which we talked about which might justify increasing the targeted range are exposure to the state fiscal policies, cost of environmental remediation projects, higher self-insured retention amount in the town's liability policies, and each risk was discussed, and the consensus was that the town would have time to respond to any one or more of these risks if they were to occur. And as such, we did not recommend changing the criteria to our goal fund balance to be 5 to 10%. We did acknowledge in our conversation, though, that the town is currently above the high end of that range, which would signal to fellow BET members that we should keep an eye on looking to lower that level of fund balance as we work through our budget processes and other decisions we make. However, we agreed that this needs to be done in a responsible way, and it may take several budget cycles to accomplish. So I'd like, I don't think we made the motion. Make the motion to approve the revised fund balance policy as adopted by the special project team.
Okay. So we have a motion to adopt the revised fund balance policy. This is made by committee, doesn't need a second, although historically I've taken seconds, so if somebody would like to second this. Okay, moved by Ms. Moriarty, seconded by Mr. Turner. I'm going to open it up for discussion. Mr. Raymer.
Just a small technical point. I direct your attention to page 6 of the handout. This handout was part of the package that was distributed a month ago. It's the report, of course, from the Debt Policy and Fund Balance Committee. By an inadvertent error, our BET handbook for a while was carrying this page, and if you take a look at the final paragraph, it talks about a fund balance between 5 and 11%, and that is just a typographical error. That should read 10%. The page you're looking at is not the fund balance that's being proposed to you for this year. It's the fund balance that we've had in place for not quite the last 2 years. If you just make that correction so that we're looking at the correct page.
Is there any other discussion? So the revision moved by Ms. Moriarty, seconded by Mr. Turner. All in favor, please say aye and raise your hand. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That item has carried 12-0-0. And the third item of old business is the vote to accept the debt policy. Similar to the previous item, the Special Committee on Debt and Fund Balance Policy presented this item as a first read at the regular February meeting of the BET, and this item is now on our agenda for consideration. Ms. Moriarty, can you please present this item?
Yes,
let me put the item on the table. Can I make a motion to approve the debt policy as proposed by the Debt and Fund Balance Policy Special Project Team at its February 12, 2019 meeting?
Okay, we have a motion by Ms. Moriarty. Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Turner.
So I'm going to comment on this policy, and then when I finish commenting and presenting what the committee approved, I would like the opportunity to make a motion for an amendment. The committee spent significant time discussing the policy and really the details that roll up into looking at our debt model and our position of debt and leverage in the town. We focused on both our BET's criteria in the existing policy to evaluate the level of debt. We looked at the infrastructure investment that's being identified in capital planning documents submitted to us both by the Board of Education as well as the town. We spent a lot of time on the structure of the debt model. We looked at that debt model, which is based on a policy of taking out a ban in the first year after a project has been appropriated, a second year of a ban, that's a one-year bond anticipation note, and then going to a longer-term financing, which currently is 5 years for the majority of investments. We used the debt model and modified it extensively to make it a planning tool. The data was updated with the current fiscal 20 capital plan, which includes all of these additional infrastructure projects, and the model was extended so we can include alternate financial structures, calculation of the debt policy criteria, and the ability to easily modify the assumptions. We talked about the benefits and negatives of the current financing strategies as well as these other appropriate maturities. We talked with the town's consultant on financial strategies to determine any changes in our criteria and how they might impact the town's AAA rating in comparisons to other municipalities. The special project team approved 2 changes to the existing debt policy, and those have been moved, incorporated, and in the document in front of you. The first one is we made some non-substantive language changes to improve the clarity. And secondly, we added flexibility to the bond sequence to allow the controller to recommend earlier implementation of the long-term debt financing if circumstances so warrant. The approved motions did pass, and the revisions to include those 2 changes was approved 4-0-0 by the committee. Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion for an amendment.
Okay, so we have a motion from the committee moved by Ms. Moriarty, seconded by Mr. Turner, on a updated debt policy approved by the committee. Ms. Moriarty, you have a motion to amend that policy.
Yes, motion to make an amendment. I want to modify the proposed debt policy that's been distributed to you as follows. On page 2, number 3 of the criteria for the ratio of net debt to the most recent grand list of no more than 0.55%. I would like the 0.55% to be changed to 0.75%. And at the bottom of that same page, in the debt structure section, the paragraph that begins at the bottom of the page to be changed as follows. The word preferred on the first line is to be eliminated, and the following sentence should be added at the end of that sentence. Going forward, debt maturities shall consider the 15-year capital plan and debt model and evaluate the use of longer-term maturities up to 20 years to address major infrastructure investments and remediation projects.
Okay, yes. Can you reread, maybe with reference to the page numbers?
So in the document that you were sent, it's attachment 3 and attachment 4 outlines the 2 changes I'm proposing now. I'm making them in one motion.
Okay.
So it's page 13 of the document has the description of the changes.
Pete, I think you might have extra copies. Do you have extra copies of the document if anyone needs it or no? Does anyone need a copy? I'll take So we have a motion to amend, moved by Ms. Moriarty as referenced on the report, page 13 and page 14, page 13 and page 17, attachments 3 and attachment 4. Is there a second? So we have the motion to amend moved by Ms. Moriarty, seconded by Mr. Raymer. I will open it up to discussion. Ms. Moriarty.
Okay, I'd like to support my motion now. This proposal came out of extensive work that the committee did and on the debt model. The modeling shows that the funding of the Board of Ed School Renovation Master Plan, plus required remediation projects, plus town infrastructure projects like stormwater mitigation, plus long-debated town recreation facilities cannot be accommodated with the use of 5-year bonds without a significant increase in the tax levy or without a significant delay in project execution. I make this motion because I'm concerned that the necessary infrastructure maintenance will continue to not be addressed. There is a real cost in delaying infrastructure projects in terms of higher annual maintenance costs, high project costs when it's addressed, and in some cases, unnecessary emergency facility issues. It also has an impact on the appeal of our community to new residents. We need to stay a vibrant and attractive community that balances the strong fiscal management with necessary investment. This change does not mean that the important task of this board or the RTM to vet projects and identify the necessary uses of capitals will be changed. It is not intended to open floodgates for projects. This is a necessary tool to maintain the town's infrastructure in a timely manner within good fiscal practices. There's some people who say that the policy doesn't need to be changed now since the criteria are not violated for several years. I would argue that it's precisely the role of good policy to anticipate issues and identify solutions. If the policy is not changed, then we're communicating to our residents, the school administration, and the town departments that we cannot implement their proposed plans. Though the need doesn't change, the departments will adjust, just like they always adjusted to guidelines from the BET, and they'll stop identifying the critical investments that are needed. They have learned not to engage on projects that they don't believe are going to be supported. It's for this reason that these changes need to be adopted now, in advance of the violation of the criteria, so that the departments know that their planning efforts will lead to the funding of a project, and so that the BET has identified the tools it has available to meet these needs. I want to remind BET members that before the adopted modified pay-as-you-go system was put in place, there was significant underinvestment in our infrastructure, such that deferred maintenance cost the town higher prices on projects. And since the adoption of the modified pay-as-you-go, we've seen a sequence of major project after major project. This system is now in its 13th year, and in that time, there has been significant investments in the schools and public safety. However, many of those projects had to wait several years to be able to be funded, and that impacts kids. A year in the life of a student is a year that they're not getting educated in the proper setting. So what's changed now? Now we have a more complete list of projects. For example, stormwater mitigation is on the ticket in the next couple of years if you look at the DPW capital plan. We have Eastern Greenwich Civic Center, which has been discussed for many years now. The Hamilton Rink skating rink been discussed for many years now. The Board of Ed's identified the need to renovate 9 of its buildings to meet ADA accessibility, safety, and next-generation school design. Not changing the guidelines in the debt policy is basically a statement that the town will not proceed with these investments in the proposed time frame, and instead will either not invest or delay these projects for many years. The prudent use of longer-term financing gives the town the ability to fund these projects within our typical mill rate structure without a negative effect on the town's credit rating. This was discussed with the town's financial consultant, and he concurred. It's also a responsible method used by most other municipalities. It will most closely match the life of the asset with the life of debt. We do understand it will result in a higher amount of outstanding debt for the town, but it does not increase the annual debt service. This change does not impact as I said before, the important role that the BET plays in scrutinizing the projects that come before us, and then the role that the RTM has in those projects. It still will be incumbent on both organizations to properly vet the projects for cost and need and scope. This has always been our responsibility. I also want to note that the adoption of this language change does not require the BET to approve the 20-year financing, and it also doesn't change the requirements for the voting for a bonding resolution. As my colleagues know, to vote for a bond resolution, it still requires 7 individual members of the BET to approve. I support this amendment so we can provide the necessary leadership for the community, for the town departments, and for the schools to provide an additional tool to meet our infrastructure needs.
Mr. Trump.
I'd like to ask, are we drafting documents on the fly on the floor of the meeting? I've never seen the language changes in question before. A minute ago, I actually still haven't seen them. I guess they're here. So the question to the chair, are we drafting on the fly?
So the report of the committee was distributed at last month's BET was redistributed this weekend. The amendment language is in the report. It is before you. It's on identified as page 13 and page 17. It is, I believe, the same language that was proposed during the debt and fund balance, I think it's called the Special Project Committee. So I don't think it constitutes drafting on the fly. I'm going to wait for our next time for that. Mr. Deuce.
Thank you, Ms. Moriarty, for an excellent summary. We had a lot of discussion on this topic over those dozen meetings over the last number of months, and excuse me if I repeat some of our discussion, but I think I'd like to share it with a broader audience. The town, I'm not aware, ever since we have adopted the modified pay-as-you-go policy, that we've been not able to fund a necessary major project. We've always found a way to do it. Our current policy gives us lots of flexibility, and as you noted earlier, it'll be some time, at least 5-6 years, before we begin to reach our current measures of affordability. You also mentioned the advantage of match funding longer-term assets with longer-term debt. We fund we don't fund specific projects with debt. We borrow to fund cash flow needs. And these cash flow needs arise out of a mix of projects that we enter into every year. It's a portfolio of projects. Some of these projects have short-term lives. Some of these have longer-term lives. The current policy gives us maximum flexibility to address these needs. The advantage of funding relatively short-term is a very strong financial advantage. Going back, well, I guess ever since the World War II, we've had very, very few periods of what's called inverse yield curves, which means the short-term borrowing rates are higher than longer-term borrowing rates. That's certainly true. I'm talking about treasuries now. We borrow not at treasuries, but at a credit spread to treasuries. When we borrowed last January, the difference between the 5-year treasury and 20-year treasury was about 40 basis points. But our borrowings, and we had some longer-term borrowings back then to fund some sewer projects, our difference in borrowings is 180 basis points. In other words, we had a 140 basis point credit spread just by going out the extra 15 years. So it adds up. And when we had a presentation to our committee by our financial advisor, we asked him the question: if we have a fairly steady state of capital projects every year, what's the best way to fund it? The cheapest way. He said, well, the cheapest way would be fund it with taxes. 5-year debt adds costs. 20-year debt adds even more costs. So you know, I understand why the concept of funding long-term, matching assets, reducing our current debt service requirements over the interim years is a very attractive proposition. But it's one that's kind of dangerous, and like I've seen it done elsewhere, it's a slippery slope, and I just would encourage everyone to really think carefully about trying to do a longer-term debt here. And I think it also would be unfair to the current generation of taxpayers to do that to the longer-term generation of taxpayers. Anyway, I'll pause there.
Mr. Weisbrod.
So, first of all, compliments to our chair, Leslie Moriarty, for the modeling work that enables this discussion to be had today and into the future in a fact-based way. And thanks to Andy and to Bill and all of us who worked hard on that modeling. What the modeling shows is if you project the master plan of the Board of Education over the next 15 years as presented, there are, if you were to fund that exclusively with 5-year debt, you can't do it. You can't do it unless you incur over $400 million of new taxes, which we all know is just not feasible or desirable. In addition, the 5-year, and this is in the model that we all agreed to, the 5-year restricted debt, it results in debt service ratios that are so substantially above our affordability targets that, you know, they just would really jeopardize our AAA rating. They go to 22.9% at the peak, and that's also obviously not achievable. So, in truth, there is no real way to fund the requirements that we're being presented with without some mix of 20-year debt. Now, what the proposal is saying is simply to consider this. None of us, myself in particular, would be of the view that we fund a substantial amount or the majority of our needs with longer-term debt. But the proposal simply says, let's consider the application of longer-term debt to provide for critical major infrastructure needs that the town has. We're talking soil remediation, we're talking the master plan, we're talking the fact that the Eastern Middle School has its foundation separated from its wall. We're talking about security needs at the high school. We're talking about the need for a new middle school, at least at Central Middle School, and so on. And so we're only saying let's consider it, as the chair, as Ms. Moriarty said. Any vote for actual bonding requires a 7-6 person vote, so that's not on the table right now. But projecting the amendment that's proposed is tantamount to saying we will not consider this. We are not willing to consider that option. Now, it's true, as my dear friend Andy says, that the needs will not materialize for a couple of years down the road, but they do materialize. And so the planners of the master building project, for example, need to have some sense that, you know, that the funding for that is on the horizon, is achievable, is doable. And if we say to them today that we will not consider the application of any 20-year debt at all, then I think we're really giving those planners a red light that says that this thing really can't go forward. The other comments I would make are that the notion of fairness, the idea that current taxpayers should bear the burden of infrastructure costs that benefit generations to come down the road, that they should bear that burden 100% on their shoulders, and that future generations should be spared that burden, is not what I would consider a fair proposition. We have schools, you know, Old Greenwich School was built in 1905, and, you know, the benefits of that have been accruing to generations since then. So I guess I'll pause on that note because I think I've probably said a lot, but those would be my comments.
Ms. Tarkington.
Yes, thank you. The town's finances over a longer term than may be recognized in discussions about the town's debt policy model. Rather than consider over how many years a project should be financed, the following is a comparison of where the town's capital project financing has been and its impact on taxation on the town's taxpayers, and contrast this scenario with the current method of financing and the impact. MISA, the high school auditorium project, is used to make the comparison. Under the town's previous and traditional pay-as-you-go method of financing, appropriations are taxed equally over a 5-year period, with the fiscal year of the appropriation being the first year of taxation. Under pay-as-you-go, MISA would be taxed over an 11-year period. Under the town's current modified pay-as-you-go method of financing for most capital projects, bands or notes are issued for 2 years in the later of the fiscal year for the approved appropriation or the fiscal year for the expenditure. In the third year, a 5-year bond with 5 equal annual principal payments is issued to refund the notes. And in the fourth year, the first bond payment is made. The last payment year is the 8th year after the initial note issuance. Under modified pay-as-you-go, which is what we have now, MISA is taxed over a 16-year period. Moving from pay-as-you-go to modified pay-as-you-go accomplished 2 things. It extended the initial taxation of a project from the first year to the 4th year, and it deferred any financing of the project until cash flow is needed for the project. Because this has permitted the approval of many additional projects, and with the project management governance remaining unchanged, it has already put a strain on management, whether paid or volunteer, of these capital projects. I don't believe this amendment is needed, and I don't support altering the town's debt policy from the current mode. We have not been burdened by debt service from our predecessors. We have a fiduciary responsibility to our taxpayers and those that follow us.
Mr. Mason.
Well, we're all out tonight, so we might as well have some fun. So, what project did we not fund that was requested? It's quiet in here. Tell me a project that was requested by the BET that wasn't funded. I know one. We did skip a sidewalk because we were getting a little up to here with sidewalks, but it wasn't for financing. I never heard the word never. I never heard that. This isn't about future. There's recommendations for the current appropriations coming up Thursday night that this board will have decision night to change the funding for current projects. So we're not talking about tomorrow. We're talking about right here and now. That's what's on the table. Okay? So let's do some math real quick. $650 million. If we were to really finance that all the long way, which we're not, because some of it's maintenance, some of it would not even qualify for that. 650, you want to pay back 683 total, or you want to pay back 945 million? We've got some real fiscal hawks in town, but let's cut it in half. Let's just say half the real projects qualify. And let's use today's quoted interest rates that we get every time we go to borrow, and sometimes we even get it sooner. So let's say we're going to do 300 and change, 3 and a quarter, let's use easy numbers, of capital projects for this school project in the town. Okay? Current projects, current interest rates, that's 15 million in interest to pay that back. You do it the other way, it's 130. It's a difference of $130 million in total payback. Somebody's got to pay it, okay? I've heard vote to the next generation. We want to hand it to our kids? Okay. We want to take away their choice? Okay. But let's just get back to high altitude. Drafting on the floor. I don't even know where that modification goes in that document. Our caucus isn't allowed to submit written draft, and we don't get to do that. But let's take a look at what we're doing. We're reviewing the debt policy. The BET has previously adopted that we're going to do it every 2 years. We're doing it sooner. Think of the precedent that you are setting now to future BETs. Every time there's an election, back to debt policy. Okay? I actually think we have some other things I'll get to that I think we should be focusing on. The committee's financial models, as handed in exhibits. During budget committee meeting, we had those models on the wall, and we raised the capital tax levy by just 1 million starting next year, and we ran that out. And we took a problem, and I agree, a problem that showed up in about 6 years, and we quickly moved it out to 14 years with just a simple adjustment, following the same current policy. Now, some of us may be here in 14 years. But those BETs in the future, they will have to make decisions for us. They will. There's no doubt about that. Modifying our current practice. Okay. So I would say this to you. We have other solutions besides just changing the term. The cost to our taxpayers will be higher. It's just mathematics, okay? Whether it's these taxpayers, next year's taxpayers, or 10 years from now, it will just cost more, and you will take away their choice. I feel this policy is something that's been discussed for a decade now. It's been brought up and brought up and brought up, and it hasn't interfered with anything we're trying to do. We have right now pressing issues. We have over 2 years of capital projects that have already been appropriated, not getting done. We have a capital management system some could argue are non-existent. Okay, debt policy is our focus. We have a dire need for employee certification and training. This summer wasn't fun with new employees over at the Board of Ed with the Julian Curtis roof. We all got dragged out for those meetings. Okay, that was job certification. That was just training. Okay. We should be working on to prevent those issues, okay? We've been dealing with insurance issues. We've been dealing with settlements. This is just not the hot topic for right now. I think we're setting a precedent. And I would say that I know for a fact when it comes to the 2 years, don't let anybody think that there's 6 people who don't want to review it every 2 years and 6 people who do. Because not everybody was in favor of bringing this policy up before its time that previous BETs had agreed to. So I think this is an issue that's political, and I think it'll be looked at that way by the public. And I think it's a very, very serious day when we make a change to fix something that there's not a problem. We have the ability to fix it with our current policy. What future BETs would do, if I was here, what I would do when a problem arose would be a different thing. But this is a 2-year policy, and it seems now that it's going to be about a 24-month. It'll be up for conversation all the time. I don't think we should do this. I think you're just clouding the issue. I think the Board of Ed's capital. I mean, we're dealing with, even if you look at it, over the last 10 or 12 years, over 600 million in capital. So what makes 15 years for 650 so insurmountable? We've done it. I don't see this dire challenge. So I hope I can pretty much tell you how the votes are going. I think people have made their constituents aware they stand. I think this will be a mistake for the town, and hopefully, because we will, if we make this change, I'm really hoping it doesn't have an impact on how we vote on our budget. Very short.
Ms. Hess.
Thank you. So, a few different observations. One is, I think it's unnecessary to bring up a policy sooner than sort of you're expecting to. If it's every 2 years, there's no real reason to bring it up sooner. I get your point, Leslie, about we need to plan if we think there's an issue. Leslie Moore, I'm sorry. I grew up with a lot of what you said too, Leslie Tarkington. But I mean, if there's a policy, but it's not, using 20-year debt is not the only way to solve it, right? As Mike said, we went through, there's other modeling that's been done, and we can push this out. So we do need to plan, we need to be aware. We've seen what's happened with excess borrowing at our state level and what we're struggling with right now. We are the envy of the state, right? The town. People look to us and what we do well. It's a policy. There's nothing that says we can't, if something came up, say, you know what, for this particular item, you know, we're going to treat this item differently. And no one's ever said that we wouldn't be willing to have that conversation. That's what a policy is, a policy, a guideline. It's not a rule, it's not a law. There's nothing that says we can't do something differently if we want to and we need to, right? But we don't need to actually change the policy to do that. This policy does not prevent us from having an individual item and collectively as a group put on longer term financing. I look at the master plan for the schools, I'm all for, enhancing our schools. I think it's one of the most important things that we do in this community. However, I'm skeptical that it'll get done in 15 years. I think even many members of the Board of Ed will tell you it's unlikely, but even if they could get it done in 15 years, there are other ways to do it. But just even our process for A&E and MI and everything that we need to go through in order to be able to get a project from start to finish, it's unlikely that we'll be able to implement that master plan in 15 years. And then lastly, I would like to add, like what Leslie Tarkington said, which is if you look at, we're not really doing short-term financing. If you consider the van, when you start putting on the debt, we actually are financing for many, many more years than people realize. Everybody thinks it's short-term because we call it modified pay-as-you-go, but it's really not short-term financing. So I think that we don't want to be putting on longer-term debt that goes out longer than that. We really, I believe that we are taxing our future generation. We can solve this thing. We don't need to solve a problem now that we should be cognizant of it. We are leaders if that's what we need to do. But just modifying the policy to say we'll consider 20-year debt, it's an unnecessary thing that we need to do as a body right now, and I don't support it.
Mr. Drake.
I think it's important. Firstly, I'd like to say, I said it before, the way Ms. Moriarty ran that committee and made cooperation was done in a very high integrity, shared responsibility, well-organized, well-governed process. But let's remember something. Our approach is a success. Our current approach works. The infrastructure in this town is excellent. Have you driven in White Plains or Bridgeport lately? We have a brand new Ham Ave school. We have a new Coscob school we built. We have a brand new Lev school. We have a brand new Coscob Park and Byron Park. We have MISA. We have new police stations and fire stations. Our fleet, you see the fleet that rolls around this town? It looks great. We've spent $664 million of infrastructure in the last 12 budgets. Our infrastructure works. We've also heard, this is not fair. We've heard this phrase that sticking with our successful financing policy is tantamount to vetoing the school capital program. That is a mischaracterization and it is not true. If there's anybody on this board that wants to prove that, you can bring up a motion that will veto the $750 million and you'll get no votes and no second. There's nobody at the table who wants to veto that plan. It is not tantamount to that. We need to remember, and I don't think we are remembering, that debt is a risk. Debt is the biggest risk of any government anywhere, and we don't talk about that. It's a risk whether you're Sacramento, or Hartford, or Chicago, or Greece, or Germany, or Venezuela. Debt is a risk for all governments, and we're all just saying, nobody's talking about that. That's major. It's eternal. And let's remember, what is municipal debt? Municipal debt is tomorrow's taxes. It's sitting there where you can count it. Every penny of municipal debt is a tax that we have to levy on our friends. To encourage a policy that grows that is not correct. Our approach works. We have the best tax rate in the state. We have very low debts. We have excellent infrastructure. And the citizens recognize that, which is why the RTM's debt finance working group wrote this. Moral hazard arises when public officials, in lieu of making tough financial decisions, elect to transfer costs for capital expenditures and regular infrastructure maintenance to future taxpayers by issuing debt or deferring tax increases without consideration of the cumulative aggregate effect of such cost shifting. I think the RTM understands the risks and the way this policy should work. And we should respect that. This policy works.
just a point of request, actually, for you, Mr. Drake, if you could circulate whatever report from
Happy
the
to.
RTM debt policy group, because I have not received it, nor I want. Are you referring to something in the package?
No, I wasn't, but I will email you, everyone, all the 12 of us, the document I was reading from the RTM.
Mr. Deuce.
I'm sorry, it was not in the package for tonight's meeting, but it was in the document circulated on February 18th to the BET.
All right, I'm looking at the
Chair's
last-
report.
I am looking at the last page, page 19, which is the report offered by Mr. Deuce and Mr. Drake.
I think that's, Bill, were you reading from that report?
Let me boot it up. Its cover page is Report of the Finance Committee, Debt Policy Working Group, March 2019, from the RTM. You'll get it in about 3 minutes.
Okay, excellent. Mr. Raymer.
So I think it's suspect whenever somebody says they're not prepared to consider something, and all you've been asked to do is to consider. There's no decision being made here tonight to fund anything on long-term financing. It's only a question about whether or not we should declare a policy in which we're unwilling to say that we're willing to even consider the possibility. What we create instead is an artifice, an artificial standard that we will not do anything except the following limited list of what of the things that we're prepared to do historically. In most communities, they're not prepared to burden current taxpayers for the whole cost of long-term financing. In most communities, they match the duration of the debt to the expected life of the asset which is being financed. My colleague talks about long-term debt as being a way to avoid tough decisions. I think, on the contrary, for us to consider the possibility of long-term debt is to be willing to accept tough decisions about whether or not, in a given case, we wish to fund for a longer period of time. Nobody is saying that the discretion of the BET, or of the RTM for that matter, has been precluded by saying we'll be prepared to consider something. On the contrary, the refusal to consider something is in fact the preclusion of the discretion later on, and I think that that's a mistake.
Are there any further comments on the amendment? Ms. Moriarty.
I just wanted to respond to some of the statements that I heard, because look, the jobs that we have and to really set the financial policy for the town is a balancing act. We have to look at what our current needs are, what our future needs are, what our sources of revenues are, and try and make the best decisions in the interest of the taxpayers, the residents, as we move forward. We talk about having great facilities, or I heard a comment on how this town is the envy, we have great facilities, but then I don't know why at every public hearing we have on the budget, we get loads of parents out here on the need for fields. We have a lot of families talking about stormwater problems and that we're not addressing those issues quickly enough. We have schools that do not have ADA access. Those are projects, those are things that need to be addressed. And to say that we're going to take them sequentially and do them in town, I don't feel that that's good enough anymore. I look at the alternate ways of financing. I think we absolutely address all of the alternatives we have at the times we're making those decisions, but to say we can raise the mill rate a little, well, we're looking at, in every year, pressure on our mill rate. We do have the lowest mill rate in the state, but I'm not sure if we as a body are willing to go out and dramatically increase that. And while $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, maybe you can adjust things, but we know we're going to have pressure on budgets going forward. Our healthcare increases are not going to go away. There's going to continue to be employee cost pressure that drives the cost for the town. What's an interesting outcome of the way that the town models the debt, and if we assume our mill rate level that we dedicate towards capital is proposed to be $53 million in the budget we're looking at for Thursday night. If you go with longer term financing, you actually end up going to the markets for less principal amount of debt. because you will, since you're paying back the debt over longer periods of time, the actual nut for the principal repayment as part of your annual mill rate cost is lower. So that means that we use that cash, the way that we run the town's finances, to pay for more projects with cash. And it's a good thing to pay for some projects with cash. We are not able to do that for all projects. So I think the message that this BET sends, if we don't adopt these changes, is one, saying we're not willing to look at other ways of financing the town's needs. Second, we're telling the town's bodies that, maybe we'll approve that financing or that project. You can go ahead and start planning for it, but you may have to wait a year, 2 years, 5 years, whatever it is. And there's a whole host of projects, and I just don't think that's the appropriate message for our town at this juncture. To say that we can violate our policy by issuing 20-year debt, that's fine. We can also have it as a tool in the toolbox and determine not to use it. I think to say that it's off the table is really closing out an issue that for this community to deal with this infrastructure need that we have. And I view this really, I know some of my colleagues disagree with me, but I think once the schools get through dealing with 9 school buildings, and we have in the past 10 years built 3 new ones, we're not going to look at the recurrence of capital spending at that level for a period of time. So we're looking at how do we deal with the immediate needs now that we don't see as a long-term new steady state for capital spending. I think it's very prudent to adopt the amendments that were given to you in writing in February and I'm proposing tonight. Thank you.
Any further discussion on the amendment proposed by Ms. Moriarty and seconded by Mr. Raymer, sorry, I lost my notes there. Seconded. Okay. Hearing none, I'm just going to point your attention to the packet. There are extra copies. We're looking at attachment 2, which is pages 10, 11, and 12. Oh, I'm sorry. All right, I'm just going to finish this, Karen, and then I'll just.
That's all right.
We're looking, just calling your attention to attachment 2, pages 10, 11, and 12. That is the debt policy language as approved by the committee 4-0. That was the initial motion, and the motion to amend is at page 13, attachment 3. That language modifies on page paragraph C3 on page 11. It changes the 0.55% to 0.75%, and the second language change being proposed is on the bottom of page 11. It's the third paragraph under D, and there is a change in the first. Yes, I have it. The first line, deletion of the word preferred, and then the addition of a sentence going forward. Debt maturities shall consider the 15-year capital forecast and debt model and evaluate the use of longer-term maturities up to 20 years to address major infrastructure investments and remediation projects, all of which is written out on page 17 of the packet. That's the amendment that's being voted on, but I understand there is a additional comment from Ms. Cassioli.
I'm sorry.
I'm not going to repeat that, however.
No, please don't. You don't need to. I'm listening to both sides of the argument, and I have to say that the reality is that we're not burdening current taxpayers. My colleagues, as has been said before, know very well that project financing takes up to 16 years to accomplish for a project. The reality is that our current policy is not putting a strain on our town's financing currently. We have 5 to 7 years to talk about this. The reality is that even if we were to fully fund the projects that are being proposed by the BOE by long-term borrowing, they cannot possibly handle them. Just the staging alone will take years for many of these projects. And adding bodies to manage these projects will not solve their problems. The BOE accepted the consultant's report and prioritized 4 projects. I went back into the minutes of their meetings, which will, by all intents and purposes, take years to accomplish. They have not even yet prioritized the remaining projects and vetted those projects. The immediate needs, I've been hearing we have immediate needs. I'm still not clear as to what they are. And the reality is that there is really no real need to change this policy to even consider this now. There's plenty more to do with procedures, management systems, et cetera, before this should even be looked at.
Okay. Last call for comments on the amendment. Okay. Now I will call for, I guess, voice vote, name vote, excuse me, on the amendment. I'm going to start with start with Mr. Deuce. The amendment to the motion that was approved by the.
No.
Ms. Hess.
No.
Mr. Weisbrod.
Yes.
Mr. Drake.
No.
Mr. Mason. Ms. Moriarty.
Yes.
Ms. Overlander is a yes. Ms. Crumick.
Yes.
Mr. Raymer.
Yes.
Ms. Tarkington. Mr. Turner. Ms. Vasiliotis.
No.
Okay, that is a 6-6 vote, and I'm going to cast the chair's tie-breaking vote in favor of the amendment, making it a 7-6 vote. The amendment has carried. We now have on the floor, the policy as amended by the amendment, and I'm going to open it up for discussion or further amendments. It was already moved. It was moved by Ms. Moriarty and seconded by Mr. Turner. Originally, it was amended by the Moriarty-Raymer motion. That amendment was just approved, so we have the amended motion on the floor for discussion. Is there any discussion on this item, the amended motion? Well, I guess I'll be the last one to speak on this. I had a few comments on the process and the substance of the Debt and Fund Balance Special Committee. Many of the substantive comments have been made, so I will save them for another time, but I wanted to comment on the process. Some colleagues have questioned whether it is appropriate to revisit the debt and fund balance policy before the designated outside time limit of 2 years. And I will say that it is always appropriate if there is a need and or overriding public interest. And here there was both. This is not the case of a rule, as was suggested, that we can only consider it at 24 months. It is a guideline, and I think public interest and need show that there was an overriding interest. During last year's public discussions, budget discussions, the BET heard from many members of the public regarding the BET's debt and fund balance policies. I stated at the time that the BET would engage in an open dialogue with interested members of our community about these policies and receive these input. And that is exactly what was done. We took this up on the earlier side so the BET could be responsive to and fully engage with the public. It was also the hope, I will say as an aside, that the board could discuss financing options separate and apart from the political dimension and election year conversation. That was a hope. Under the leadership of Leslie Moriarty, the BET Debt and Fund Balance Policy Special Committee held 10 meetings over several months and engaged in an unprecedented and fully transparent exchange of ideas over the policies and improvements to the town's capital model. While we don't always agree on outcome, we can all be proud of the respectful dialogue and the example that was set by Leslie and the other members of this committee, David, Bill, and Andy. In addition to the committee members, I particularly want to thank Peter Minarski and Roland Geiger, who facilitated much of this work. And I also want to call special attention to the members of the RTM and public who actively participated in this dialogue and attended many of these meetings. Really set the bar, set a great example for the town. So I did feel like I needed to address that because I do think it was a great example of the BET cooperating publicly, transparently, and in response to issues raised by the public. I recognize that substantively we may disagree on outcome, but process-wise I think you all did an exceptional job, so thank you. So that being said, I'd like to call for a vote on the policy as amended. Again, I will call for I'm out of voting sheets. It's a little indication that I'm going to have to print more for the Thursday. I'm going to call for a name vote on the policy as amended, starting with Mr. Deuce.
I vote no.
Ms. Hess.
No.
Yes.
No.
Mr. Mason. Ms. Moriarty, yes. Ms. Crumick.
Yes.
Mr. Raymer.
Yes.
Ms. Tarkington. Mr. Turner. Ms. Vasiliotis. I'm sorry, Karen. Ms. Vasiliotis, no. And I vote yes. That is a 6-6 vote, and I'm going to cast the tie-breaking vote in favor of the amended policy 7-6. That item has carried. That concludes the old business. And now we move to item 11 on the agenda, which is a couple of items of new business. Thankfully, we've already accomplished the first item of new business, which was the appointment of the town treasurer. We now have two items of new business put on the floor by the HR committee. The first item of new business is M&C salary increases for fiscal 2019, 2020. Mr. Turner.
Yes, Madam Chairman. Once again, I would like to invite my colleagues to the next page after the controller's report in our meeting packet. And at the top, you'll see the heading of BET Human Resources Committee recommendations to the BET. Specifically, this is regarding the M&C salary increase recommendation for fiscal 20. We did take a look or discussed in the committee several things in reaching our decision before voting 4-0-0. They were pressures on the town's budget given the financial constraints at the state level, elimination of state funding to the town, recent changes in the federal tax laws, regional cost of living index, the town's proposed budget in the coming year, and the impact of changes from a raise in salary on employees' total compensation package. Having had that discussion, we voted for and I so move, the BET consider an M&C salary increase of 1.5% with the possibility of an additional 0.5% awarded for high performance at the discretion of the employee's manager.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor. Can you restate that motion? Mr. Turner, was made by Mr. Turner, seconded by Ms. Vasiliotis, and the motion is?
Yes, that I move the BET consider an M&C salary increase of 1.5% with the possibility of an additional 0.5% awarded for high performance at the discretion of the employee's manager.
So are you moving that we consider this, or are you voting that we approve this?
I'll correct that to say approve.
Okay, can you restate the motion?
I move that the BET approve an M&C salary increase of 1.5% with the possibility of an additional 0.5% awarded for high performance at the discretion of the employee's manager.
Okay, so we have a motion made by Mr. Turner, seconded by Ms. Vasiliotis, that the BET approve an M&C salary increase of 1.5% with the possibility of an additional 1.5%. So you're moving a total compensation of, possible total compensation of 2%?
Correct.
For fiscal year 1920. Okay, I'd like to open that up for discussion. Ms. Moriarty.
I just wanted to ask the question, confirm, my recollection for last year, the M&C increase was 2.5% at the max, is that correct?
I don't recall specifically the increase for last year.
Well, I would like to make an amendment to that motion. I do apologize for making it on the fly. But in thinking about the M&C compensation range, one of the comments that have, actually I'll make the motion, see if I get a second, and then I'll tell the rationale. My motion is that we replace the HR committee motion of a total compensation pool of 2% with a compensation pool for M&C employees at 2.5%, which was the compensation pool used for the 2018-19 fiscal year with, and the compensation, should this, I will go into details if I get a second on this, would be the same threshold as used for the 18-19 year.
I'll second that motion.
So I have a motion from Ms. Oberlander, seconded by Ms. Crumick, and that is to amend the HR committee motion to provide that there would be a base increase and a high performance increase for M&C compensation according to the following principles: a 1.5% increase for management and confidential personnel with a performance rating of exceeded objectives or met objectives as long as their salary was below the grade maximum, with an additional high performance increase for those who consistently go beyond standard expectations and stand out as a performance leader and or demonstrate outstanding performance in a special role or project. An additional 5% for the high performance can be awarded for those employees who meet either or both criteria in an excellent manner, or 1% for those who do so in an exceptional manner. This is the same performance criteria and pool. It's a total of up to 2.5%, provided that they're not at the grade maximum that has been used for the 2018-19 year. And my rationale for proposing this amendment was that in thinking about these employees, these are the employees that we rely on to implement town policy and to supervise other employees and to drive the direction. And we've been told by the HR director previously that the compression in those salaries and the incentive of a 1.5 versus a 2% doesn't really give them the opportunity to incentivize employees, and I do think that these employees are really worthy of the ability to achieve the exceptional review and the compensation accordingly. I open up the amendment for discussion. Ms. Vasiliotis.
I, for one, am disappointed that this amendment is being offered tonight. I would have hoped that you would have brought this to the HR committee to have a discussion. That did not occur. The HR committee took their vote, and I believe that what we considered other options, and we did not approve other options. And I would hope that my colleagues on this board would support the HR committee's findings and recommendations.
Ms. Crumick.
I'd like to respond to Ms. Faciolitis that actually in the meeting I did try to propose this and I never got a second. So although I put the option forward, it was not addressed and discussed by the committee.
Ms. Tarkington.
I think we have to remind ourselves that the area inflation rate is about 1.6%. I do agree with you, Jill, that we need to tier this better. And, we actually had that kind of program when we had the hay structure, which was then replaced by the current structure. It took a long time for the town to put in place a hay structure. I think that, as you pointed out, it also relates to, and compensation should relate to where the employee is in the range as well, as his performance. I like the idea that you're bringing up such a structure. I think it does have an advantage, and I do think that our employees deserve that. But I also think that, it's been years and years since this town has even thought in terms of total compensation packages. And our benefit package is very high and, much better than the private sector, et cetera, et cetera. So I would encourage the thought process that you're presenting this evening, and that the HR committee start thinking this way for our management employees. I do think it's worthwhile. But at this point in time, in terms of, bringing it up at this point in time, I sat in the HR committee meetings too and listened to their thoughtful process. I don't support this amendment at this time, but I do think it does present some ideas that should be considered as we move ahead.
Mr. Drake.
Just, could we have a little dialogue, just so I better understand? Please remind us, how many MNC, Peter, please remind us, how many MNC employees do we have in our town, roughly? About 55. And just to think about what Ms. Overlander has proposed, would you say, if we, as I understand it, we're adding another kind of a tier of another 0.5% on top of the 1.5 plus a half, make it 2.5. Is there any way to guesstimate how many of those 55 people might end up in that third tier?
Is to add the extra. So the third tier, as you referenced it, is actually what we had for the current year. I think your question is which of those employees will get that rating. One can't predict. I think I don't know how many employees within the finance department that are subject to the MNC. I guess people would be able to answer how many are MNC in each department. Mr. Tessie has a number of MNC as well. I don't know whether we can predict how they will be reviewed.
And so, Roland, when you said this extra little 0.5% costs $45,000 a year, is that what you said a minute ago?
Yes, that's what about a 0.5%
That
is.
is all 55
Yes.
people landed in the high category.
Yes.
So if half the people landed in the high category, the cost of the town would be half the 45,000.
Depends on their salary, I guess. It's a percentage.
Depends on this. You're right. It's scattered. Thank you for making the dialogue on it. I, for one, think the point is very well made to say that our MNC employees are really who we look to for the town, and the responsibilities are high. We look to them to save money elsewhere. And so, under those circumstances, given all that, I'm convinced of the rationale of this idea, and I vote for it.
Thank you. Anyone else like to comment? Mr. Tessie.
You want a raise. That's why I'm out looking for a job, because I want a raise. Good evening. I just want to lend my support to the motion this evening, and I do so based upon the comments that have been made and the observations shared. There is no doubt that this town, with a decentralized governance structure, depends upon the leadership of its department heads, many who report to independent appointing authorities to govern it. And I think by any measurement, Greenwich is well governed, not exclusively because of the volunteer component, which we champion, but due to the professional management that each of us are responsible for overseeing. And so I think while the dollars may be minimal in total to the overall budget, the message that you're sending is incredibly important to continue to recognize the work that these professionals do, to provide them a sense of confidence in their leadership, and frankly to assuage some of the unpleasant elements of what they have to go through in reporting to many cases one entity, but they're really answering to the RTM, the BET, to their respective appointing board, and to the public at large. So that is not something that people in the private sector have to do, and I think there is a cost to that I think should be recognized, valued, and respected. So I lend my support to your motion this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tessie. Is there Mr. Weisbrod?
I have one comment and actually a question, maybe if it's possible to ask Mr. Tessie. I actually was all prepped to vote against this amendment in a mood of complete nonpartisanship, if you will, based on Ms. Fasciolitis' comment that, you know, we have the HR committee vetted this, the HR committee reviewed this, and that's the domain of the HR committee, and that this amendment has come in, you know, at the last minute, and that the amounts were, you know, I mean, it's not the amount. The amounts are not material. I am persuaded by Mr. Tessie's testimony, and the only question I have is, you know, are there systems in place that prevent everybody getting an E rating or an excellent rating that would then really dilute the impact of this? I know that Roland said 50% or so are in that category, but is there enough discipline? I'm not on the HR committee, so I don't know, to ensure that we, you know, manage it with rigor.
I think that's a legitimate issue to raise, and I do think it's come up over the course of several BET administrations as the results of these annual assessments are shared. I do think in part it requires considerable education on the part of the appointing boards. We have a number of them, and oftentimes their intention is to be advocates for the people that they oversee, and I do think it would be beneficial if this board and my office were to sit down with each of them and explain the expectation we have in the rigor in which we expect them to go through to fulfill this process. And we do remind them, but I do think a collaboration on this will lend itself to address the issue that you're raising, because it's a legitimate one.
Regardless of which pool is passed, I'm always happy to accept any invitation to collaborate with you in the conversation.
You got a few more months.
Ms. Tarkington.
I'd just like to add another point here. You know, we're sort of doing this. It would have been nice to have had this information in advance and to give the more thoughtful process that the HR committee does provide here. But I am concerned that this, you know, raises another sort of level when we go to union negotiations. I mean, you know, again, the inflation rate is 1.6% for our area. And once it's perceived or now stated or documented, if this passes, that we're providing our, you know, one group of employees 2.5, I think that's a lead-in to future labor negotiations. Again, I think we have wonderful MC employees, and I do think they need to be, well, you know, fairly and well compensated. But I would hope that this is something that could be better handled in the HR committee and given the thought and work out a system perhaps more like the Hayes system, where it does exactly what you're saying, Jill, and Peter is talking about supporting and better education of our boards and commissions so we can execute such a system. But the reason we went off Hayes system was because even the management in our HR department didn't understand it. And so I do think that if we're headed in this direction, I would hope that we could again, I'm not on the HR committee, but the good folks on the HR committee could, sort of thoughtfully work to implement this.
Ms. Cormick?
I'd just like to remind everyone on the BET that we did agree to this in 2018. We have the language, we have the structure in place, and that HR committee and that BET sitting at that time approved it.
Ms. Vasiliotis?
I would just also add, I mean, if you could reread your motion, because you added some language here that I'm not sure, do we have these systems in place to evaluate people against certain criteria? Again, I'm not very clear as to what that is.
This is the language from last year, actually. It was printed out from, I think, the board package from last year. The HR department sends out the performance evaluation forms to all of the department heads and the supervising boards, and in that packet is guidance on how one gets evaluated. So
And if
they do provide guidance as part of the evaluation form. I'll reread the language, but it is the same language for the compensation pool that was used and approved by this BET last year. I do apologize for raising this at the last minute. I was waiting for resolutions for the BET. I did not want to send out an amendment to a resolution, having not had the resolution in front of me. I take full responsibility. It does, I agree, it is not consistent with the practice that I have asked everyone to follow, so I do apologize, but I do think this is important. I think it's an important message. I highly, highly value the MNC employees that report up through the BET. They are exceptional employees, and I think that the rationale behind this tiered approach as was adopted last year, which allows there to be different gradations, is important. So I'll read it again. The motion is to increase the MNC compensation pool by a total of up to 2.5% per employee for 2019-20, and to allocate this pool into a base increase and a high performance increase according to the following principles. Bullet 1, a 1.5% increase for MNCs with performance ratings of exceeded objectives or met objectives as long as their salary was below the grade maximum. Bullet 2, an additional high performance increase for those who consistently go beyond standard expectations and stand out as a performance leader and or demonstrate outstanding performance in a special role or project. An additional 0.5% can be awarded for those employees who meet either or both criteria in an excellent manner, or 1.5% for those who do so in an exceptional manner. So the high performance qualification, this is me editorializing, has again a separate tier for excellent or exceptional.
And just to refresh my memory, because I don't recall us passing this last year. I think that what you're referring to was the year before, before this BET was even formed. So again, there are people on this board that, was it last year? Because I don't recall.
I'm looking at the meeting of the February 20th, 2018 minutes for the full BET, and it includes this language. The motion that was passed by the Human Resources Committee as presented by Mr. Turner was 2.5%. So in that case, it was the same dollar amount, but then there was an amendment to separate it. Instead of 2% plus a 5% increase, it separated it to 1.5, 0.5, and 0.5. So February 20th.
Again, I'm going to express my disappointment in getting this again on the fly. I think that a better process would have been to circulate this to the members beforehand to say that, look, if there is no motion forthcoming, this is what I'm proposing. I am, again, as a member of the HR committee, we did consider alternatives. Beth was correct. I had forgotten that she made the motion. It wasn't seconded by the four of us. And, I'm not happy with this process at all.
Further discussion on the Oberlander motion to amend as seconded by Ms. Crummett? Okay. Hearing none, I'm going to call for a voice vote, and we'll go on the other side this direction. Ms. Vasiliotis.
No.
Mr. Turner. Ms. Tarkington. Mr. Raymer.
Yes.
Ms. Crummett.
Yes.
I am a yes. Ms. Moriarty? Mr. Mason? You're abstaining? You want me to come back to you at the end? Or- Mr. Drake? Mr. Weisbrod?
Yes.
Ms. Hess?
I'm sort of struggling myself because I don't like the process and how it went, but I actually support the notion of what they're trying to do, and I agree with you and echo with you, the MSC employees and all that, and so, I think I'm gonna abstain right now myself.
And Mr. Deuce?
I do appreciate Karen's comments, but I will vote yes.
Mr. Mason, did you want me to come back to you?
We've had longstanding policies about these drafting on the floor or even using past documents, although that seems to be out the window tonight on several occasions. And that makes it difficult. I do support the MSC thing, but I go back to our committee structure. The committee had reasons for this. Personally, I get nervous on compression, so I would support it for that reason. We have that, and I know we do have systems to check, but no contact ahead of this meeting, no ideas, and it's just, this stuff pops up here, and, when we stop respecting our committee structure, I get nervous, so I'd rather, I'm abstaining.
You're abstaining. So the final vote is 7-3-2. The motion to amend has carried. And now, I need a vote. Well, is there any discussion on the motion as amended? Okay.
So, on this item, a no vote means there would be no increase, so a yes vote would be the motion as amended.
Yes. Thank you for that clarification. Yes. So to vote no on the motion as amended would mean that you're voting against any M&C compensation. You're voting now that the motion on the table is to propose an M&C compensation pool of 2.5% for 1920 under the principles as discussed previously. So a no vote is on that compensation. Motion as amended. Yes.
The fact of the matter is that a no vote is really not, I'm going to vote yes on the side, but just so we be correct, a no vote simply is not approving that increase at this time. It does not include other motions either in this meeting or at another.
That is, well, someone else would have to propose a resolution on, if this amended, if the amended motion as amended, the motion on the floor is not passed, then at some point, someone else would have to propose a new item of business for an M&C compensation. Okay. Further discussion on the motion before us. Okay. On the amended motion, Ms. Vasiliotis.
Abstaining.
Turner, Mr. Turner?
Abstention as well. I don't know what I'm voting on both times.
Ms. Starkington? Mr. Raymer?
Yes.
Ms. Crummett?
Yes.
Ms. Oberlander is a yes. Ms. Moriarty? Mr. Mason?
Yes.
Mr. Drake? Mr. Weisbrod?
Yes.
Ms. Hess?
Yes.
And
Yes.
Mr. Deuce?
Yes.
Okay, so that item has carried. 5, 6, 7, 8. I did miscount 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 0, 3. Which brings us to our last item of new business, which is the resolution on elected official salaries for calendar years 2020 and 2021. Mr. Turner, do you have a motion for us?
Yes, Madam Chairman, if I could invite my colleagues to the very next page in our meeting packet from the one that we just looked at. This is specifically regarding the BET Human Resources Committee recommendations to the BET regarding salaries for our elected officials, specifically for the 2-year terms ending 2021. So the BET HR Committee, obviously we met and discussed this particular item. The comparables that we looked at as provided by the town's Director of Human Resources included 8 comparables. 4 of the comparables had increase ranges of between 2 and 4% and inclusive of 4%. The remaining 4 were giving 0 increases to the elected officials. So with that in mind, I am ready to I'm ready to move the approval of certain increases separately for each of the 4 elected officials. 3, sorry.
4.
3.
Mr. Turner, I just had a question about the comparables. Did, maybe you could give us a little bit more guidance on that and whether they were all Connecticut-based and whether it was for all of the positions that you're referring to. So when you say that 4 had no increases, you're saying those 4 communities gave a 0% increase to all of the elected officials.
Correct. The research done by the Human Resources Department came back with the numbers that I described, earlier. However, I would footnote it that the numbers were not specific to an elected office. They gave us the numbers for their town.
Okay, so you don't know whether each elected official got that same increase?
Well, for
or
those
lack of increase?
for those that gave 0%, I think it's safe
Yes.
to say that they gave 0%.
Okay.
For those that were between 2 and 4% inclusive of 4, that could certainly be a possibility.
Okay, are there any further questions for Mr. Turner? Okay. So for clarity purposes, if you could make each motion separately, and we'll need a second for each motion.
Sure. You ready to begin? Okay. So the first motion will be for the Office of First Selectman, and that is that the committee moves to have an increase of 2% for the calendar year 2020 and 1.5% for the calendar year 2021 for the First Selectman. Specifically, here are the numbers for that. The First Selectman current salary, $144,840. The proposed increase of 2% for the calendar year 2020 would raise that number to $147,737, and in the second year of 2021 to $149,953.
Okay, so we have a motion by Mr. Turner, seconded by Ms. Tarkington, to increase the salary for First Selectman from the current $144,840 by 2% for the calendar year 2020 to $147,737, and then to further increase that sum by 1.5% for the calendar 2021 year to $149,953. Did I get that correct, Mr. Turner?
Yes, you did.
That motion has been made and seconded. Is there any discussion? Ms. Moriarty?
I just want to ask a point of clarification. I believe the first selectman's term starts December 1st. Did you purposely not match the salary increase with the term of office?
No, in looking at the history, some of the history of the motion, some of the motions in the BET did include the detail of starting December 1st, others did not. I think that's why we have a finance committee, is to make that specific determination, noting that the term does start December 1st.
So there's no recommendation coming from the committee because you didn't focus on it. Is that what do you have a recommendation?
Your motion called for an increase for calendar 2020. So, are you? If there is so it would start on January. Your motion suggests that it would start on January 1st, 2020. Is that? Does anyone want to amend that?
I'll make the motion to amend that the period of increase should be from December 1 through November 30 for the first, should be annually on December 1. I think the easiest way to do it.
I second that.
So we have a motion to amend Mr. Turner's motion for salary increases for the first selectman, moved by Ms. Moriarty, seconded by Mr. Raymer. Is that right? Or I'm not sure who seconded that.
I'm sorry, who was it? Who was making the
That's seconded by Ms. Tarkington. Yep. And that is to change the dates for the increase to commence on December 1st, 2019, and then commence again on December 1st, 2020 for the increases to cover the staggered term of the first selectman. Is there any discussion on that amendment? And hearing none, I'm just going to call for a voice vote on that. All in favor of that amendment to the motion, please say aye and raise your hand.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? That motion has carried 12-0-0. We now have the amended motion on the floor for the salary increases with changed dates. Is there any discussion on that motion? Ms. Moriarty.
I just want to ask her a further question, and if you already stated this, I'm sorry that I missed it, but the rationale for changing the percent increase in the second year, dropping it from 2% to 1.5, can the members of the committee identify that rationale?
The discussion was over the inflation rate, and we decided to blend it over 2 years, giving a higher in the first and then less in the second to kind of track the inflation rate. I think the other issue too, now that I remember, I'm sorry, because this was done a while ago, was that we would have a new selectman coming in. We didn't want to discourage that person coming in, but then again, blending it to the second year.
Maybe
they won't know.
I'm just going to,
What can I tell you?
I'm not going to make a motion to amend. I've been properly chastised for my process. But I would like to suggest that, similar to our M&C, our first selectman is a highly regarded
There's no question about
person in town. I recognize that people choose to run for this office, so they come into office well aware of what their compensation will be, so it's not quite the same. But I would encourage members of this board to recognize the leadership that's shown by the chief executive, whether it be our current or our future.
And I don't think that, you know, the HR committee in any way meant to disparage the office of the first selectman. We certainly value that position, and you know, we just felt that it was again it was mostly driven by the inflation rate.
Mr. Raymer.
So let's sample the view of the BET as a whole. I'm going to move that the second year's increase, that the motion be amended to reflect an increase in the second year of 2%.
So we have a motion to amend the motion that's on the floor to increase the compensation for the first selectman salary from 1.5% to 2%. I'm gonna guess you don't have a number for me to put in the motion. Do you, Mr. Raymer? That motion has been made by Mr. Raymer and seconded by Ms. Moriarty. I will open that up for discussion. I never question your math, but my hearing maybe. All right, so if that motion is to increase the 2021 salary increase commencing on December 1st, 2020 to be $150,692. Okay, any discussion on that motion to amend? Ms. Vasiliotis.
Again, our leader here is silent, but I'm expressing disappointment in this motion. I guess I would, you know, you've got a group of individuals in an HR committee that has made a recommendation to this body. I don't think I've ever seen, you know, such disregard for recommendations that I'm seeing tonight. But I would urge you to accept the recommendation of the HR committee.
No offense intended.
Yeah, I would just like to point out that it is not a lack of regard. It just may be a difference in viewpoint on
Madam Chairman?
Mr. Turner.
Yes, I too share in my colleagues' disappointment. I recall that in most occasions, many BET members are in attendance to the HR committee meetings, and it's really a disgrace that this is the first time we're hearing any of this for discussion in this late hour when we all were in the same room talking about the very topic at the same time. Secondly, I think we have to really think about what we're doing here. We're about to move into a budget season where we're $17 million short in revenues. Expenses are under enormous pressure, and we're talking about raising the salaries of elected officials and an appointed official when clearly we have no problem in attracting the talent and the caliber of people that we have in the past to run the town. It makes absolutely no fiscal sense whatsoever for the town to be facing the kind of fiscal pressure that it's facing, and the state to be facing what it's facing, and us moving to first not take the committee's recommendation when that could have been discussed far earlier than now, but to give a whopping 2% back-to-back increase. It's just something that I can't support.
Further comment on this motion to amend. Mr. Raymer.
I really made the motion because I want to take the temperature of the BET and how they feel about this. We've just taken the MNC employees, and they have a maximum, not all will receive it, at 2.5%. It seems to me logical that it's not so extraordinary that we have a 2% increase for our elected officials. think it's a judgment call. By the way, I have the highest regard for people who serve government executive on the HR committee, no offense was intended. But I think each BET member has the right to exercise his own discretion and doesn't have to accept the report of one of its committees wrote, although I have high regard for what the committee in fact does report. In this particular instance, my own judgment would have been that 2% in the second year seemed fairer, but I will certainly listen with interest to the vote of the BET as a whole.
Mr. Mason.
I obviously, on the amendment to get the dates correct with the elected term, I voted on that. As you know, I'll be abstaining on this motion, and I hope anybody who's considering running for any of these offices will be also abstaining too in their vote. We wouldn't want that to come back later that they participated in a vote that could have had a direct benefit to them.
Well, now I'm definitely taking a voice vote. Mr. Deuce.
I think I'll take this opportunity to note the yield on treasuries, which tend to correspond with inflation rates, broadly speaking. And recently, the one-year treasury was yielding 2.41, and the applied forward rate for the one-year treasury 1 year hence is 1.211. So it is an inverted curve right there. But both of those rates are higher than what we're talking about in terms of these increases here for these offices. Just observation.
Thank you. Ms. Tarkington.
I'd just like to add here that that this amendment also impacts the compensation for the selectmen, because by charter, they get 10% of the first selectmen's. So this is just, again, an automatic, if this motion passes, 2% for both selectmen also. And again, I mean, I'm kind of mind numb because benefits come with this for a selectman's job. Our benefit package far exceeds that one can get in the private sector. And, our local inflation rate, Bureau of Labor Statistics inflation rate, is currently 1.6%. So we want to attract great people, and I think we always do.
Further discussion on the motion to amend. Are you discussing again? No, you're taking notes. Me too. At Mr. Mason's suggestion, I am calling for a voice vote. I'm going to start. Oh, which side?
You mean name vote?
A name vote. Sorry, name vote. Mr. Deuce. This is on the motion to. This is a motion to amend the Turner motion for an increase to the first selectman's salary from the current $144,840 by 2%, to increase this current salary by 2% for the 2020 year commencing on December 1st to $147,737. The amendment is to increase the second year of that term, the 2021 year that commences on December 1st, 2020, to $150,692. So the amendment is that it's second year increase. It's not on the full motion. It's just on the increase from 1.5% in 2021 to the 2%, $150,692. Okay, Mr. Deuce. Yeah, Mr. Drake.
The Raymond motion.
We're voting on the amendment to the motion, which is going from 1.5%. I was not that clear in my statement. I apologize. 1.5% to the 2%.
In the second year.
In the second year. Mr. Deuce.
Not for reasons that Mr. Mason alluded to, I will abstain.
So far, so good. Ms. Hess.
Well, I abstained the first time we went through this, so I guess I'll kind of stick with that.
Oh, my goodness. Okay, Mr. Weisbrod.
I abstain.
If we're voting on changing the 1.5 in the second year to 2, I vote no.
Mr. Mason.
Abstain.
Ms. Moriarty. Ms. Crumick.
I abstain.
Mr. Raymer.
Yes.
Ms. Tarkington?
No.
It's gonna be a tough one. Okay. Mr. Turner? Ms. Vasiliotis? Okay. I haven't voted yet. Oh, it's an amendment. Yes, right? So, oh, but then it ends up being one. It's still gonna fail. 2-4. Okay. So I'm gonna vote yes, but the amendment still fails. 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 3, 4, 5. Okay. So that amendment fails, which leaves the motion on the floor at 2%. Do I need to repeat the whole motion? Mr. Turner, would you like me to repeat the whole motion? I'm fine. 2% for 2020, 1.5% for 2021. Mr. Mason, would you like to make your comment again? No. So, just for fun, we'll start with Karen. Okay. Mr. Turner? Ms. Tarkington?
Yes.
Mr. Raymer?
Yes.
Ms. Crumick?
Yes.
I am a yes. Ms. Moriarty? Mr. Mason?
Abstain.
Mr.
Yes.
Drake? Mr. Weisbrod?
Abstain.
Ms. Hess?
Yes.
Mr. Deuce?
Yes.
Okay. So that item has carried 10-0-2. Okay. Mr. Turner, do you have another motion?
I do, and I can't wait to see where this one's going. All righty then. We move to the category of selectmen.
I think selectmen is.
My
That's
mistake.
done.
My mistake, yes.
So we don't have to vote on that.
Correct. Moving now to town clerk. I move to approve an increase of 2% for the period beginning December 1st, 2019, and 1.5% for the period beginning December 1st, 2020 for the town clerk.
Yes, Mr. Raymer.
Does the term of the town clerk, and for that matter, the tax collector, start on December 1st or January 1st? January 1st. So,
Oh.
would the movement want to rephrase his motion?
Sure, let's make it calendar.
Okay, I'm sorry, can you restate your, and did we have a second for your motion?
He hasn't finished making the motion.
He's still reading it.
I move to approve an increase of 2% for calendar year 2020 and 1.5% for calendar year 2021 for the town clerk.
Would second that.
Okay, so we have, do you have the dollar value so we know what we're voting on?
I do. The current salary of the town clerk is $104,002. The 2% increase would move that number to $106,082. And the 1.5% in year 2 would be $107,673.
107,000, sorry, what was 600?
673.
Okay, so we have a motion by Mr. Turner, seconded by Mr. Raymer, to increase the salary for the town clerk for calendar 2020 from $104,002 by 2% to $106,082, and to further increase the salary for calendar 2021 by 1.5% to $107,673. Is there any discussion on that motion? Hearing none. Do we need a voice vote on this? Let's take a voice vote, name vote on this as well. Ms. Vasiliotis.
Sorry. Just
be consistent with my colleagues, I'm going to abstain on this one. And just for no other reason, just to abstain.
You're not running for town clerk?
Well, time will tell. Mr. Turner?
I think I'm the only one not running in this municipal election.
I felt like abstaining.
What are you looking at, Mr. Mason?
I'm telling you, by September, we're going to have so much fun.
We were talking about a manhole off before. The real manhole came out here. The real manhole was found tonight, right here.
Mr. Turner?
I vote yes.
Mr. Raymer?
Yes.
Ms. Crummett?
Yes.
Ms. Moriarty? Mr. Mason?
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Drake, yes.
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 You guys are too fast for me. Yes, and I'm also a yes, and so that item has carried 11-0-1.
Did somebody say popcorn?
Mr. Turner, do you have a motion for me?
Well, we're on a good roll here, so yes, I have another motion. This is for the tax collector, and I would move to approve an increase of 2% for calendar year 2020 and 1.5% for calendar year 2021 for the tax collector. And these numbers would be, the tax collector numbers would be exactly the same as the town clerk.
Okay, just for our record keeping and our minutes, can you tell me what those numbers are?
Yes, current salary, $104,002. First year increase, specifically for calendar 2020 would be $106,082. Second year 2021 increase would be $107,673.
Okay, we have a motion by Mr. Turner to increase the tax collector salary by 2% for calendar 2021 from the current $104,002 to $106,082, and then to further increase the salary for calendar 2021 by 1.5% to $107,673. Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Raymer. Okay. Any discussion? Okay, I'm going to call for a name vote. Again, Mr. Deuce.
Yes.
Ms. Hess.
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Mason.
Yes.
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 I'm abstaining.
Oh, okay. And I am also a yes, and we are a well-oiled machine. That is 11-0-1. That item has carried, which brings us to the end of our new business, and brings us to Chair's report, which I will make brief since it's very late. A couple of items. Special meetings. I want to thank the BET members for the time and attention last month when we had 2 special meetings in addition to our regular meeting and annual budget work. There was the joint BET Board of Ed meeting on capital planning processes, and work has already begun on implementing the recommendations included in that report. I expect that we will receive another update from the education liaisons in the next month or 2. In addition, there was a special meeting to receive the consultant's report on operations and strategic direction at Nathaniel Witherall. Again, that strategic planning committee is meeting to develop a recommendation for the full BET on next steps, and again, I expect we'll receive their input in the next few months as well. This week is filled with BET meetings. I want to remind members and the public that the BET public hearing is scheduled for tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. in this room, Town Hall Meeting Room. The BET has a budget workshop scheduled to review some of the identified budget issues on Wednesday evening at 5 p.m. in the Habermeyer boardroom. And our budget decision meeting is on Thursday in this room starting at 4 p.m. I read someplace that it was 5. We changed the time. We're starting at 4 p.m. and hopefully we'll end 410. Following that, next week starts the BET attendance at RTM meetings. I will recirculate the meeting schedule with assignments and any changes requested. Please reach out to the appropriate committee and district chairs to let them know you will be attending to answer any questions they may have. As always, thank you for your hard work and dedication to the town and this board. Which brings us to item 13, which is approval of the BET meeting minutes.
I'd like to make a motion to have an approval of the BET regular meeting minutes for February 19th, 2019.
You want to do it one at a time?
I do.
So we have a motion for the February 19th minutes moved by Ms. Crumick, seconded by Ms. Tarkington. Are there any comments or corrections on those minutes? Okay, hearing none, I'll just call for a voice vote. All in favor of accepting those minutes, please say aye and raise your hand.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Those minutes have been approved, 12-0-0.
I'd like to make a motion that we approve the minutes from the special meeting of the BET held on February 26, 2019.
Okay, so a motion by Ms. Crumick, seconded by Ms. Tarkington. Are there any changes or corrections to the February 26, 2019 special meeting minutes? Hearing none, I'll call for a voice vote. All in favor, please say aye and raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That item has carried 12-0-0.
I'd like to make a motion that we approve the minutes from the joint meeting of the BET and the Board of Education held on February 26, 2019. Is that right?
We have a motion by Ms. Crumick, seconded by Ms. Tarkington. Are there any comments to the joint meeting minutes for the BET Board of Ed as distributed? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye and raise your hand.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Those minutes have been approved, 12-0-0. Which brings us
Madam Chair, I propose we adjourn.
Thank you, Mr. Deuce. Thank you, and all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Adjourned at 9:50.